Tonight, should Governor Pritzker opt Illinois into a federal program that offers scholarship money for low-income students to attend private school? Venezuela, Russia, immigration. How do Americans feel about these issues? A new survey from the Chicago Council on Global Affairs with some revealing findings. And the quiet northern Illinois burg of Woodstock readies for its Groundhog Day close-up. And welcome to the Chicago Report. I'm Paris Schutz. Some big changes coming to Cook County's embattled electronic monitoring program. Chief Judge Charles Beach launched a review of the program and announced the new guidelines today. Notably, anyone in violation of electronic monitoring will be forced to appear in court within 24 hours. An unauthorized absence of more than 3 hours will count as a violation. That time frame up to this point has been 48 hours. Now, the changes come in the wake of the high-profile loop burning of Bethany McGee, where suspect Lawrence Reed was found to have been in violation of his electronic monitoring from a previous offense. Well, right now it looks like another partial government shutdown could be averted. Senate Democratic leaders are announcing a bipartisan deal to fund 5 of the 6 federal agencies that are up right now, but they would leave the Department of Homeland Security out. Instead, DHS would receive temporary funding for 2 weeks, while both sides went back to the drawing board to negotiate reforms to things like ICE and Customs and Border Patrol. Now, earlier in the day, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries laid out a list of demands Democrats want met before any deal is considered.
I have not specifically spoken to any Republican other than Speaker Mike Johnson as it relates to the appropriations bill. I did reiterate in my conversation with Speaker Johnson that we intend to proceed with impeachment proceedings if Kristi Noem is not fired.
And meanwhile, add another Illinois congressman to the growing chorus of Democrats who want to abolish ICE. Northside Chicago Representative Mike Quigley says he came to that conclusion after the shocking killing of Minnesota protester Alex Preddy, saying, quote, "We must dismantle Trump's ICE from the top down, in its place build an organization recommitted to the original mission of immigration enforcement in our country." And back here at home, Governor Pritzker has a big decision on his hands. Should he allow low-income families in Illinois to access a federal school tuition tax credit program that could help them afford private school or some tutoring for their kids? Advocates say it gives thousands of Illinois families trapped in failing schools a way out, but public school proponents say it's just part of the Trump administration's plan to erode public education. So joining us to weigh in on this very big question, Bobby Sylvester, Vice President of the Urban Center, a centrist education policy group, and Cassie Creswell from the Illinois Families for Public Schools. Welcome to both of you. I want to start with you, Bobby. What exactly does this federal tuition tax credit program do?
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on. What it does is it allows taxpayers in the United States of America to donate up to $1,700 and receive a dollar-for-dollar tax credit to fund scholarships for students who want to attend private school, who want tutoring if they're at a public school. And so this is a tremendous opportunity to access even more dollars for education.
And this, the states have to opt into this? Each 50 state has
Correct.
to opt in?
Yeah,
so that's what the governor has to decide this.
Yeah, so Governor Pritzker and all the other governors have a big decision to make on whether they want to opt into the program. And certainly we want to encourage Governor Pritzker to opt in because this program provides additional funds for public schools and it provides an opportunity for kids to go to a private school that might best fit their needs. And it's important to note, if the governor decides not to opt in, the funds can go to other states that do opt in. So choosing not to participate just simply means that the dollars from Illinois taxpayers who choose to participate will go to other states instead of benefiting Illinois families.
And Cassie Creswell, you are urging that folks call Governor Pritzker to advocate the opposite, to not opt in. How come? You know what, Cassie? I think you might be muted. Let's make sure you're there. You are.
This is really a voucher program. We experimented with this in Illinois for 6 years. You said in your intro that this is going to benefit low-income children. In fact, in the old voucher program, about $1 in $4 went to low-income students, and that was with a much lower eligibility level. This program, a family of 4 in the Chicago area with a household income of even more than $350,000 will be eligible for this program. And the people making the tax credit contributions will also be able to use those for their scholarships. So this is really a big giveaway to wealthy taxpayers, and it's really going to go primarily for private schools. And we saw that here in Illinois for 6 years.
Yeah, well, I'd like to respond to that if that's all right.
Sure.
So first of all, calling it a voucher is just misinformation. This is a tax credit scholarship program, meaning it's a voluntary donation from taxpayers to the scholarship granting organization that will work with the families and the schools that they want to work with to fund these scholarships. So the idea that it's a voucher is just simply not true. Yeah.
And Cassie, I don't know if we lost your sound there a little bit. Are you still there with us?
Yep.
Okay, great. So did you want to finish your thought here? So now Bobby's saying it's not necessarily a voucher program, and that also that this wouldn't necessarily only be for private schools, but it could be used for things like tuition. Is that your understanding of this? I'm sorry, tutoring.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a voucher program. There's different ways to structure voucher programs, and tax credit scholarships are very desirable because they hide the fact that we're giving public dollars to religious institutions. When we had a voucher program, which is also a tax credit scholarship structured program in Illinois, 95% of the dollars went to religious schools. And it's important to know that religious schools do not have to follow the same laws that public schools do. And so they can discriminate against students on the basis of disabilities, on the basis of LGBTQ+ status, on the basis of pregnancy status. You could be kicked out because you had an abortion. And we saw policies like that all around the state. So it really is fundamentally problematic to use our tax dollars for private schools. And this is not just a charitable contribution. A charitable contribution, you get about maybe 30% back if you claim that on your federal taxes. This is a $1 to $1 tax credit. It's up to $1,700 per taxpayer. That's very different than any kind of charitable contributions that we see. And it's really this strong subsidization of the whole private school industry.
All right, so Bobby Sylvester, what about, is there a separation of church and state issue here? If the federal government is subsidizing money for private schools, that's a problem?
No,
or Catholic school, religious schools?
Not at all, because again, this is where I think Cassie's spreading some misinformation here, where these are taxpayer dollars, so meaning you as an individual or anyone listening out there who's a taxpayer in the country of the United States can electively decide to participate in this program. It's not mandatory, and it's your tax dollars, right, that you're saying, I want to send part of it to help a student, right? And that could go to, again, public school students to help fund tutoring, exam fees, things like that, or it could go to a private school. And certainly, we think that more options for families are the best thing for everyone, right? And certainly, I would point out that Governor Polis, who is a gay governor, has opted into
Colorado, a Democratic governor.
Democratic governor has opted in. So I just fundamentally reject the idea that this is discriminatory against LGBTQ students.
Cassie Cresswell, I think your group has said that this could result in lesser funding for public schools. How would that work?
So as Bobby said, these are your tax dollars, and you are simply redirecting them to private religious schools for the most part. And so that is public money that would otherwise go into the U.S. Treasury. And this is, probably this program could be anywhere from $25 billion to $50 billion at the federal level. We're only spending together $33 million about on IDEA, that's funds for students with disabilities, and Title I, that's funds for schools with lots of low-income students. This could basically be a massive federal outlay and a real change in federal education policy in terms of what we're actually spending U.S. tax dollars on. So that is problematic. And we've also seen that the truth is voucher programs do not result in better academic outcomes. And that is especially true for low-income students. And the long-term programs that we've seen around the country, Ohio, Louisiana, Indiana, the results in terms of academic achievement are distressingly harmful, actually. So not only do vouchers not improve academic performance, they actually harm students' outcomes. And they really lead to a lot of flux because this is not a stable system. And we will see that happening here in Illinois if the governor opts in.
So you're saying that there's maybe a better way to spend this kind of federal money to boost funding for education, as we know federal funding has been cut for public education. But Bobby, is this a way to try and circumvent or weaken or erode public education to give more benefits for private education?
Yeah, not at all. Not at all. It's important to note that the state of Illinois has never spent more money on the public education, and that's part of that is the evidence-based funding formula. And the state has been putting $350 million into that program every single year. And the vast majority of educational funds come from the state and local governments. So certainly, right, we're making investments in the public schools. We should continue to do that. And this program, it's important to note, is additional federal dollars, right? So the federal government, as the title programs, as Cassie mentioned, right, those are going to continue to be funded. Those are going to continue to come to the state of Illinois. These are additional federal dollars that could come to Illinois. And if the governor decides to opt out, those dollars are going to go elsewhere. So we can't be saying we want to fully fund our educational system, both private and public schools, and turn down free additional federal dollars.
All right, so Cassie, I want to give you the last word here because you heard the argument that if Illinois rejects this, well, that money will still just go somewhere else. So it's not as if you're going to get rid of the program by rejecting it. What about that?
The harm to schools in Illinois will happen if we opt into this program. So even a small shift in population from public schools to private schools leaves public schools with a loss of per pupil funding from the feds. It also loses per pupil funding from the states, and it puts an extra burden on schools. Schools have fixed costs like their physical plant and their employees. They can't just suddenly reduce all of that at the speed of a few kids leaving. In the rural school districts in Illinois, especially, a tiny flux of enrollment could mean that you will have to consolidate with the district down the street. This is extremely problematic for a fiscal perspective for school districts. And I really hope that school leaders and school board members around the state understand that this will be harmful for public schools, and we need to use public dollars for public schools. And if we opt in, this will hurt our school budgets immediately.
All right. This is, as we mentioned, an important decision for Governor Pritzker, who did put out a statement in the last couple of days saying he is carefully weighing the pros and cons here before he decides what to do. And my thanks to Cassie Cresswell and Bobby Sylvester. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Paris.
And up next, how do Americans feel about Venezuela, Russia, immigration? A new local survey with some revealing findings right after this. Venezuela, Russia, Ukraine, China, foreign policy is at the center of President Trump's agenda these days. But how do average Americans feel about all of these issues? The Chicago Council on Global Affairs has a revealing new survey showing the public's attitudes and how Republican and Democratic voters are split. So, Craig Kafura, you are with the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, and you did this, you administered this study. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me, Paris.
Okay, so first of all, what you put this out every year. What did you set out to measure?
So this is the 50th anniversary year of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs eponymous Chicago Council survey. We've been doing this since 1974, tracking American attitudes on a whole range of foreign policy attitudes, from how the role America should play in the world, how Americans feel about alliances, the most critical threats facing the country, the most important goals for the United States, and then how the U.S. should deal with all of the problems around the world.
And so one of the first big broad questions are, you're asking folks, do you believe the U.S. should have an active role around the world? What were the results on that?
So as we've seen over the last 50 years, Americans remain interested in playing an active role in the world, though at slightly lower levels than we've seen in the past and with slightly more partisan division than we've seen in the past, but still interested in that sort of active role for the U.S. Though, of course, that means different things to different people. For some people, an active role means working through the United Nations system or working with allies. For others, it means being involved in international trade. And for others, it means maybe using the U.S. military abroad.
And how about the notion of using the U.S. military in Iran, to acquire Greenland, Venezuela? What are you seeing on those fronts?
Well, the notion of acquiring Greenland, whether it's through a military conquest or purchasing, is pretty unpopular among Americans, and that's true more or less across party lines. When it comes to the operation in Venezuela, after the fact, Republicans thought it went well. Democrats didn't like that we did it, but given that there haven't been any further deployment of troops, maybe that issue will settle down a bit. But when we ask Americans, would you want to try to run Venezuela? Would you be interested in regime change in other countries in Latin America? There's very strong opposition to that.
And that's bipartisan?
That's bipartisan.
What about the biggest threats globally facing the U.S.? There's a bit of a difference on party lines here.
Yeah, so this is one of the findings I think that was most interesting for us. When we look back across the whole sweep of the Chicago Council survey data, it used to be that Republicans and Democrats would generally agree on the most critical threats facing the country. International terrorism, other countries acquiring nuclear weapons, things like this. But over the last several decades, and especially in the last decade, Democrats and Republicans have started to drift apart in the things that they consider most important. So immigration is one example. Immigration used to be a concern for both parties. Now Democrats, only 14% of Democrats think that the large numbers of immigrants and refugees coming to the country would be a critical threat.
And I think we're looking at your graph
but
here. So this is
68% of Republicans.
the changes over time. So the red line up there is Republicans.
Red line is Republicans. The light blue line is Democrats. And you see independents sort of tracking pretty closely along with that dark blue of the overall American public.
So independents and Democrats do not view immigration as a huge issue or threat, but Republicans do, and which is interesting because it seems to be the basis of Trump's domestic policy and part of his foreign policy too.
And that's one of the things that we saw actually in the 2015-2016 Chicago Council surveys when we were looking at the then candidate and then newly elected President Trump. His base, issues they cared about the most were immigration and immigration.
And maybe the economy at some point.
The economy at some point, everyone always cares about inflation and how the economy is doing.
And then you mentioned China. Republicans view China as a greater threat to the U.S. than Democrats view.
Yes, and that's been an interesting shift recently. Again, this is a case where historically Republicans and Democrats were mostly on the same page about China. There was a big shift against China between 2018 and 2020, especially in 2020 with the pandemic and sort of the collapse of U.S.-China relations.
Right.
And for several years there was a consensus that China represented a critical threat to the United States, that the U.S. should pursue a more containment-focused policy and should cut trade with China in order to preserve U.S. national security. But this year we found that no longer holds true for Democrats and for a lot of independents. Democrats are now more interested in pursuing cooperation with China. They no longer see China's rise as a critical threat, and they no longer see U.S.-China trade as being bad for U.S. national security.
Do they give you a reason why? Do you ask them in the survey? Why is it that you've changed your view on China being a threat?
I think a lot of this has to do with when we did the survey. This was in July of 2025, and this is at a period where
China wasn't exactly in the news as much as some of these other issues were.
No,
NATO, Russia, Ukraine.
And also, this was before Trump and Xi had their meeting in South Korea on the sidelines of APEC to sort of settle some of the pressing trade disputes. At the time, the U.S. and China were in a back and forth escalatory pattern on tariffs.
Tariffs, what about that? I'm going to assume here that the views on tariffs have shifted a bit
Yes,
by party.
just a little bit. Democrats have really fallen out of love with tariffs as a foreign policy approach. And that's
For some reason, Republicans, not so much.
Republicans, following their president, who they still favor quite strongly, still see tariffs as a great way to achieve U.S. foreign policy objectives, and they generally are more likely to favor restrictions on trade to protect American jobs. Democrats have moved very strongly in the direction of free trade over the last year. They oppose restrictions on trade. They want to make the U.S. economy more open globally. They oppose imposing new tariffs on other countries. So with big policy changes comes big shifts in public opinion.
And when the leader of a certain party perhaps advocates a position, a lot of the party faithful follow along. What's the takeaway here in this report? What can be done with this data? What's the utility of it?
So I think first is just understanding that while we used to have a certain level of bipartisanship on foreign policy, for example, if you look back at our Cold War surveys, right, there was bipartisan consensus on how the U.S. should approach the Soviet Union. There was briefly a period where we thought that this was going to happen for China, that China could be a new unifying issue for domestic foreign policy issues. That's no longer the case, right? The China consensus that briefly held has fallen apart now in the United States between Democrats and Republicans, at least among the public. And second, I think this points to one of the real challenges for the U.S. going forward. If you have two parties that disagree fundamentally on the goals for U.S. foreign policy, on the most critical threats facing the country, it's going to create more back and forth in U.S. foreign policy, which makes the U.S. less predictable, maybe slightly less attractive of a partner internationally.
Yeah, I think international leaders saying, well, how can we count on the U.S. if every 4 years you're going to just dramatically change your outlook? All right, Craig Krafura, this is the 2025 Chicago Council Survey on Americans' Attitudes on Foreign Policy. Great report. I urge everyone to go dig it up and look at it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Paris.
All right, well, how much more of this brutal winter can we take? I don't know. Maybe none more. Pretty soon we're going to get the answer from the greatest prognosticator of them all, Woodstock Willie, of course. Groundhog Day is coming up, and the quiet northwestern suburb of Woodstock is getting ready for its annual celebration, immortalized, of course, in the classic Bill Murray movie, Groundhog Day. So joining us now is Melissa McMahon from the Woodstock Groundhog Days Association. Hi, Melissa. So Woodstock started this whole thing after the movie because Woodstock was standing in for the role of Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania. Punxsutawney Phil, the main groundhog that we know. But would you say that this has become, an event in and of itself for the town of Woodstock?
It really has. Since 1992, when the movie was filmed, and 93 when it came out, we have celebrated starting in 1995. So we've celebrated every year, even 2011 when there was a blizzard and we had to kind of put that on hold. People still came out. There's pictures of people in snowshoes coming out there. But we celebrate every year, year after year after year.
And we're showing some scenes from the movie, which of course was filmed in the beautiful town of Woodstock. There it is. There are the streets of Woodstock. Tell us what you have on tap this year. I know that you get together in the square and you've got the gazebo and everybody's festive.
It is. We're going to kick off tomorrow night with a welcoming of the groundhog, and that is our mascot, the 5 foot to 5'7" mascotted costume. And then we've got the dinner dance. Saturday, there's a 5K. There's almost 700 runners in that in February of all times. And then there's events all day, all through the weekend. So we've got a pub crawl, we've got the dinner dance, we've got screenings of the movie. And our special guest this year is Stephen Tobolowsky. He played Ned Ryerson in the movie. Of course,
Ned the Head, needle-nosed Ned.
This year and going to give some great talks.
Yes, who could forget Ned Ryerson? A great role, immortalized by Stephen Tobolowsky. Phil Connors, I thought that was you. So my question here is, who determines whether the groundhog is seeing its shadow or not?
That's the groundhog.
Well, how can you tell, though? How do you, if you see a big shadow, you know, okay, that they're seeing the shadow 6 more weeks.
Yes. We laugh and say you have to be fluent in groundhogese to read the proclamation, and Stephen Tobolowsky will read it once again, and will let us know what the groundhog has said.
That's so much fun. What
It's all a little.
Yeah. Well, I know how we hope the groundhog responds next week. Tell us what 30 years of this. What is it? How has Woodstock grown as a result of the notoriety from this movie and this wonderful festival that you put on every year?
So we have visitors throughout the year who come specifically for groundhog, for that experience of what they saw in the movie. People from across the country and across the globe. And what's really fun is our entire community has kind of adopted this. Our businesses will carry groundhog themed merchandise year round. It's not uncommon to find a food special. No actual groundhogs are served, but a lot of the restaurants will get behind it. There's a Drink to World Peace that's at the Square on the Square restaurant, which was the same location as the bar where Phil and Rita had their drink, and they serve that year round too. And this year we've incorporated a shadow quest. So there's 31 businesses in town. You have to go around and try to find this little figurine of Woodstock Willie. Just a good excuse to get people into stores and restaurants that they normally wouldn't. And everybody just really, just gets behind the spirit. It's fun, it's interactive, it's family friendly. It's just a good time.
And I've seen that spirit out there. I've seen people wearing Woodstock earrings and having Woodstock themed drink, Woodstock Willie themed drinks. So do you think Woodstock's taken over Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania as the groundhog capital?
We like to think so.
All right. Well, hey, some of that Illinois local pride here. Woodstock Groundhog Days starting tomorrow. A lot of great events you have. Melissa McMahon, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
All right, that is our show. Questions or comments, have a story you want us to look into, email me at parisonpolitics@fox.com. That is it for us tonight. We are back next Monday, same time. As always, keep up with all the news you need to know at fox32chicago.com and with the Fox local app. Stay warm, everybody. Let's hope winter comes to a close sooner rather than later. Good night.